Hello and welcome to this new coffee subscription tasting video. It's already April and Easter is coming up. I was just in Central America, so now we're going to taste 3 nice coffees that we're sending out on the first Wednesday of April to all our subscribers around the world. If you don't know what a coffee subscription is, you can go to our website. You can subscribe to 1 to 6 bags. We send it out on the first Wednesday of the month. I pick the coffees every month, so you will get different coffees every month. You can pause and stop the subscription at any time. And you can also upgrade and downgrade as you like, as you go. Cool, today we're tasting 3 very, very nice coffees. I think it's time we get some refreshing coffees now because it's April. We know spring is coming, summer is soon here, golf season is starting very soon. So we need something nice and refreshing to start the kind of summer, spring time. I've chosen 3 coffees from different countries actually this time. And we're going to taste them side by side as a cupping. If you don't know what a cupping is, we have a tutorial on our YouTube channel. It's pretty easy to set up. You put 11 grams in a cup that can contain 180 to 200 grams of water. You just grind the coffee, pour water on and wait a little bit, stir, and then you can start tasting. I'm going to taste with a spoon today, but you can also put the coffee into a cup and then drink from the cup if that makes you more comfortable. If you only subscribe to 1 coffee, I highly suggest that you actually taste the coffee next to some other coffee. So if you have any other coffee laying around, it could be instant coffee or anything, just so you have something to compare with. It's always easier to taste something when you have something to compare with. So I highly recommend at least having 2 coffees on the table when you taste the coffee. If you don't want to do that, you can also just brew a coffee and enjoy it and, you know, watch this video as you drink it and enjoy the coffee. So let's get started. The first coffee we're sending out is a very, very fruity coffee. And this is because it's a natural processed coffee. Natural process means that the farmer picks the coffee cherry. He will just dry the cherry as it is. And then after the coffee is dried down to around 10% moisture, they remove the cherry skin and pulp and everything, and then the coffee is exported. Most of our coffees are not processed this way because when you dry the coffee as a natural, you normally add a little bit of fermentation flavor. There's nothing wrong with fermentation flavor, but I feel that it can be quite overpowering sometimes, and that means it kind of tastes the same whether the coffee is from Brazil or Panama or Kenya or Ethiopia. The fermentation flavor is very, very similar all the time. Now, when you dry coffee cherries on raised beds, there's normally more of a yeast activity going on. So you will get some flavors of strawberry, sometimes banana, sometimes pineapple. Sometimes it's like rotten fruit. If you dry it in very thick layers, the coffee doesn't dry efficiently. You can also get moldy flavors if you have too much rain during the drying. Of course, we wouldn't buy any coffee like that. Now, this coffee is produced in Ethiopia, where they have a tradition of doing natural process. And this is produced at Tatmara Coffee Plantation. It's in Bonga, in the southwest of Ethiopia, and produced by a fellow called Nacimiento. Now, Nacimiento has one of the most beautiful farms I've been to. It's literally a forest that he's kind of leasing, and he planted coffee inside the forest. He only cuts weeds by hand. He doesn't fertilize, he doesn't spray anything. And he grows spices and coffee and native trees. There are baboons coming to steal his coffee cherries sometimes. There are wild animals, and it's really, really like a coffee paradise. Now, the cultivars that he grows are the 74110, which we have sent out previously, and also now the 74112. These numbers are actually just numbers for cultivars that were developed in the Jimma Agricultural Research Station. So it's just a selection that they made. They are quite similar in flavor, but they are also slightly different. So the previous one that we sent out was the 74110. That was, for me at least, a little bit more kind of citric, floral, a little bit higher acidity maybe. Whereas the 74112 that we're sending out now is a little bit more winey, maybe has some more flavors of like very ripe mango, some red berries, and some florals as well. It's quite tropical in the flavor, like super ripe mango, but not like rotten. And I'm very picky on my naturals. I want them to taste like really clean and ripe fruit, not this kind of overripe, almost rotten strawberry, or the strawberries that are melting in the sun, that are almost purple. I want them to still have quite a lot of acidity and be kind of firm in the mouth. So these fruit flavors are predominantly from the fermentation that you get when you dry the cherries, but also the coffee, 74112, is quite floral and also citric when you drink it as a washed coffee. So these flavors actually go quite well hand in hand, and it feels more integrated, I think, when you do a natural with a coffee like this. As opposed to, for instance, when you taste a coffee that is quite nutty when it's washed, and then you process it as a natural, you kind of get the fruit and the nuts, but they don't really match very well together. So for me, these naturals need to be very like peachy and floral and like fresh fruits. So Nacimiento is producing naturals only at the moment. He is actually very tedious when it comes to the drying. In Bonga, you can have a lot of rain during harvest. It's quite high altitudes. But last season, there was a lot of sun. He was able to dry the coffee efficiently, and he dries the cherries in very thin layers, and that means they dry efficiently, so you don't get these kind of very overripe fruit flavors. Now, we have actually collected some money for Nacimiento, and we actually sent them over last month because we are constructing a wet mill together with him on his farm. And we had our 15-year anniversary last year, so we decided to collect money from our guests and customers to sponsor Nacimiento into building a wet mill so he can wash the coffees as well. We won't stop buying his naturals because I think they're really, really nice. But in seasons where it's too much rain, then he has another option where he can process the coffee and dry it more efficiently, even if it's raining. Because drying naturals when it's raining is really, really difficult. So it kind of gives us more security so that we can buy his coffee regardless of the weather. So I hope you like this coffee. Some people are not so keen on naturals, but I urge you to try this, and maybe you should try it next to another natural, just to see that naturals can also have quite a bigger variance in flavor. That can also just be from the yeast, but it can also be from the varieties. Super sweet fruit, super ripe fruit, mango, strawberry, red berries, florals. Hope you enjoy this coffee. Now the second coffee is kind of an Ethiopian coffee, but it's not. It's grown in El Salvador. It's grown at the Los Pirineos farm, and it's an Ethiopian variety that they grow there. Now, there's a huge difference in flavor between the first and the second coffee. And this is because obviously they're grown in different altitudes. The Los Pirineos is around 1,400 meters, where the Tatmara is up to 2,200 meters, I think. And also different climates, different cultivars. They also have a slightly different process. So the Konka, we call it. It's an Ethiopian cultivar that they named Konka in El Salvador. I think it's supposed to be Konga. But this is processed with a mechanical demucilage remover. So that means they don't have a lot of water on this farm. And what they do is they depulp the coffee and they remove the mucilage, maybe 90% of the mucilage, with a mechanical machine. It's kind of a centrifuge that uses friction and water to remove the mucilage. And then they put the coffee out for drying on raised beds. Now, compared to the Ethiopian, this coffee is a little bit lower in acidity and has more of this kind of milk chocolatey base it's very common for the coffees from Los Pirineos. It's kind of like you eat a milk chocolate bar and then there's some added fruit inside, if you know what I mean. So with this coffee, because it's an Ethiopian cultivar, it has a little bit of the florality that you can get in some Ethiopian coffees, but it's not extremely distinct. And it also has a little bit of stone fruit character, but very mild. It's not like you would never confuse this for being a coffee from Yirgacheffe, for instance. It's quite distinct, has this kind of chocolatey, slightly fruity, slightly floral characteristic. Very sweet. Beautiful coffee. You know, I can just imagine sitting in the cabin or outside the cabin in the sun during Easter in the snow and drinking this coffee, listening to the radio, solving crosswords. you know, stuff like that. Very, very sweet and comforting coffee with a little bit of this kind of more of a citrus peel maybe flavor, stone fruit, a little bit of florals. I was just there on this farm, visiting in March, visiting Diego, so we will get some very, very nice coffees from them also this year, for sure. Now, the last coffee we're sending out is also an all-time favorite of many of our followers. It's a coffee from Finca Nacimiento in Honduras, and it's a Pacas cultivar. Now, we sent out some coffees from Nacimiento 2 months ago. We sent out the SL28, we sent out some of his geisha. This is his kind of standard coffee, the Pacas cultivar, and it's from the first picking of the last year's season, which means it's normally coming from the lower altitude. This season, the weather was a little crazy, and he had a lot of struggles getting workers and everything. So the coffee from the top of the farm was picked early, and sometimes it was picked late, and everything was a little abnormal, I have to say. He was supposed to produce over 100 bags for us, but we only got to buy 55, and we bought everything that was of good quality. So the season was not as good as it has been, but still Hobnil was able to produce pretty nice coffees. And for me, this coffee is very kind of characteristics for this farm. Very sweet. It has a little bit of herbalness because it's an early picking, but also has this very nice fruit character that reminds me of eating red berries. It's very structured. Super smooth. Very kind of a sweet mouthfeel, smooth mouthfeel. So clean, quite transparent, I have to say. Has a little bit of this kind of green bell pepper flavor from the herbalness, but also a kind of underlying fruity character. Now, if you compare it to the Los Pirineos, this has much more of this kind of milk chocolatey. The mouthfeel isn't as smooth, but it's more like a rich and mouth-filling thing. Whereas the Pacas from Finca Nacimiento, it's like you're drinking fruit juice or something. Very juicy and clean and smooth mouthfeel. So Pacas is actually a Bourbon mutation. It means that the tree was found in El Salvador, and among a lot of Bourbon trees, they've discovered a small tree that had mutated. So that means it was shorter, produced quite a lot of cherries. It's quite similar to the Caturra. It's kind of the same type of mutation, but discovered in El Salvador. So this is quite popular in Honduras, and especially in the Santa Barbara area where Nacimiento is located. There's a lot of farmers who grow Pacas for a good reason, because it tastes really, really nice. And in fact, when I started buying coffee at Nacimiento, Hobnil was mainly producing Catuai and some Old Bourbon and a little bit of Pacas. And then we started separating these cultivars to taste the difference. And it was so clear that the Pacas and Bourbon were much, much, much better than the Catuai. Also, his Catimor from the lower part, not as good, but from the high part, really, really good. So over the years, since we started working with him in 2009, we have kind of recommended him to plant more Pacas, more Bourbon. The Bourbon he's a little reluctant to do because the trees are quite tall, they're not as resistant and so on. So the main production from this farm is Pacas. Now we're gonna see maybe in the coming months later picking from this farm, and then you can actually notice the difference, because there is subtle differences from the early pickings and the late pickings on this farm. Sometimes huge differences, but last season a little bit more subtle, I have to say. Cool, those are the coffees we're sending out. I really hope you enjoy them. Happy Easter holiday if you're going to the mountains or wherever you are. I hope you will enjoy this coffee on vacation, and if not, then you have something to look forward to until you come back from vacation. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you next month.